Greetings all, it's me again, your friendly U.S. history teacher, and today's screencast is going to be related to what's going on in the home front, what government actions were taken to effectively mobilize, and what it means to mobilize is to basically get ready. Make sure the economy is ready, make sure the civilians are ready, make sure the soldiers are ready in order to fight the war that we officially declared on Japan on December 8th, 1941. So we're going to quickly go through this together. I'm recording this at school, so you might hear some interesting things in the background. We'll see. So the home front. I love this piece of propaganda by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, something interesting to think about. If you look at that tank, you see all kinds of ethnicities represented by the last names all around that tank, representing the idea that everybody's got to work together. And that becomes kind of the theme of World War II. Everyone has their part, and everyone must do their part in the war effort. So as we go through this little lesson, keep that in mind as we're taking a look. But if you see this right here, I think this is interesting. You can certainly take a look at the impact of World War II on the American economy that was still struggling as a result of the Great Depression. We'll never know if Roosevelt's New Deal policies fixed the Great Depression because of World War II. And so in 1932, America's gross domestic product, which is the sum total of all the goods and services produced in the U.S., was $58.7 million. And if you look here in 1942, a significant change. America is producing, of course, producing for the war effort. And if you look over here at this line graph, you can certainly see there is a significant drop in unemployment as a result of the war effort. People on the home front building the machinery and doing what it takes to send their soldiers and sailors and aviators off to war. And then, of course, people are employed in the military as well. So let's continue our look at what's going on. Now, each one of these visuals that I've got here for you represents a piece of propaganda. We talked about this in class as part of I&O today. Propaganda is information designed to get you to think in a specific way in order to take some sort of action. Propaganda generally gets a negative rap, if you will. Sometimes propaganda can be positive. But this is propaganda that was used by the federal government of the United States. And during World War II, we see a significant increase in government power. We see the War Production Board on the upper left taking over, and regulating what different manufacturers could make. They needed to gear their production toward the war effort. Over here, you see this woman taking an oath that she will pay no more than top legal prices and accept no ration goods without giving up ration stamps. The Office of Price Administration literally took over the economy by rationing goods, allowing us only a certain amount of goods, and also setting prices so that when there were very few goods to be had, for example, tires or gasoline, we needed those for the war effort, the price of those things would not go up. And here, the National War Labor Board worked hard to make sure that workers and management had relationships that were conducive to producing for the war effort. And then, of course, we had the Office of War Information. Their goal was to, get people motivated, keep people motivated for the war effort, and to encourage them to do a variety of things and to think in a certain way about our enemies and also our allies. And so they are the ones who actually put out all these propaganda posters. And I've got some other examples of propaganda posters here for you to take a look at, designed to hit a variety of audiences, right? Even Walt Disney, top right-hand corner there, got involved in the propaganda industry, trying to get people to think in a specific way so they would act in a certain way to end World War II. Now, everybody had their part to do. During World War II, people had to participate in what were called blackouts and blackout drills, especially here on the coast. If you lived in York, Maine, you would want to make sure that you had blackout curtains in your windows, and that's to make sure that, for example, if enemy airplanes flew over the coast or enemy ships were off the coast at night, they could not see any light from your from your home, from your windows. And so every family would have to have blackout curtains. And there were civilian defense corps. Those were folks who were maybe too old to join the military, but wanted to be involved, and they would go around to make sure that your blackout curtains were up and that you were doing what was best for the community to keep the community safe. Even kids were doing their part. Especially again, thinking about life on the coast here in York, Maine, you would be, shared. You would have these spotter cards shared with you because you would be taught, to look for enemy airplanes in the air. You wanted to get familiar with those things because again, we're on the coast. And you would also participate in gathering up scrap rubber, which could be used in tires for Jeeps, and also treads and tanks. You would also help with scrap metal drives. So everybody had their part to do in World War II, even those who were really concerned about looking good. Before the days of like tights and nylons and that kind of stuff, women's stockings, for example, were made out of silk. Silk was no longer available because those had to be used for parachutes. So women would actually kind of dye their legs a certain color to make sure that their legs looked pretty when they were out in a skirt. And you can even see here, pre-war and post-war, this is actually British, but it also was in place here in the United States, that clothing actually got a little smaller, right? So that material could be used in the war effort itself, right? So no longer long skirts, long sleeves, shorter skirts, lapels on men's jackets got smaller, fake pockets instead of real pockets to save material, all kinds of things. The government also rationed products. And there are lots of videos at my website on the Homefront playlist that you can take a look at. But rationing was a critical piece of World War II. Everybody was impacted by rationing. The government restricted the products that we could buy. And those were products that either were expensive to produce or maybe needed lots of security to bring the product to the United States, or that were necessary for the war effort, either to build the machinery of war or materials that were needed for food for soldiers. So some of the rationed items you see listed here: tires, cars, bikes, and so forth. One of the first things that was rationed, for example, was sugar. That's because we got lots of our sugar from Hawaii, and it would be very expensive and also very unsafe to ship that sugar in from Hawaii, for example, because you're going to use your Navy for something else. Each month, families would get their ration books from the rationing board, and those ration stamps would have to be used in order to make your purchases. In other words, it didn't matter how much money you had. If you didn't have ration stamps, you wouldn't be able to buy any of the products. Again, check out the videos at my website for a little more detail into rationing. Everybody has their part. So moms, who were typically the keepers of the homes, they got really good at making rationed meals, and they had to get really creative because they were limited on sugar, limited on the amount of meats. So they got really creative and were able to, basically make a meal out of a whole lot of nothing during World War II. Now, when I said everybody does their part, this part gets pretty harsh. As you know, on December 7th, 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor as a direct result of the embargo the United States placed on products, and also as a result of the freeze on Japanese financial assets in the U.S. And Americans were furious. And as a result of that, and as a result of propaganda, you would see things like this, especially out on the west coast of the United States. And so one of the things that the Office of War Information had to do was to kind of keep us angry, keep America mad, because you know what you've got to do in a war? You're going to send your sons, and at the time sons, fathers and brothers and nephews, grandsons off to war. You wanted to keep us mad. And they generated propaganda that looked an awful lot like this. Some of the most racist propaganda that we saw during World War II is related to the Japanese, and it is also going to have an impact on the fighting and some decision making that the United States made when it came to fighting the war in the Pacific. Early on in the war, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued what is called Executive Order 9066, which essentially has kind of the weight of law during that president's administration. And Executive Order 9066 had a significant impact on Japanese families, both Japanese families who were immigrants to the United States and people who were born in the United States of Japanese ancestry. And essentially, Executive Order 9066 ordered that Japanese people and people of Japanese ancestry be moved from certain zones on the west coast of the United States, moved inland to what were called internment camps. Again, check out the videos at my website for lots of great details. And here you can see the exclusion area. That's where Japanese families and people could not stay. Take a look at that. Makes sense, if you will. It's on the west coast. You travel across the Pacific, and there you have Japan. So the people were nervous about the loyalty of Japanese individuals, and in fact moved them to these internment camps, in the west coast of the United States. So more propaganda. Heck, we needed people to fight this war, didn't we? So we've got all kinds of propaganda designed to encourage our young men in particular to join the military, to join the Marines, the Army, the Navy, and of course the Air Force. World War II is where we're really going to see the Air Force, I'm going to say it, take off and be critically important in the fighting of this war. This is also the time period women can join. WACs and the Waves, they're not going to see direct combat, but they are certainly going to play crucial roles in World War II, more traditional roles such as nurses, secretaries, and that kind of business. So who was your typical American soldier? GI, right? You hear that name American GI? That means government issue, right? They're put out there by the government. I chose this picture, by the way, on purpose. That kid looks really young to me. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm just getting old, right? But over 5 million Americans volunteered. My grandfather was among them, and 10 million more were drafted, and we know a little bit about that draft. Of course, I mentioned WACs, Waves, and WASPs, Women's Army Corps. The Waves were the women's branch of the Navy, and the WASPs were the women's branch of the Air Force. And these are people from all across the United States, all backgrounds, really feeling focused and interested in joining and participating in World War II. And by the way, for those of you representing the Japanese families, please know that we also had, Japanese individuals signing up to fight, and make sure you take a look at that. But what you need to understand is that World War II was a time period when we also dealt with segregation in our armed forces. The Army was segregated. There were African American units. There were, as I mentioned before, Japanese units. So, there's not perfect, but again, people having a focus and having their role. Those in segregated units tended to have jobs that were in black. Let me speak again. The segregated units, the black units, they tended to have jobs that required manual labor, digging of ditches and driving of trucks and that kind of business. Now, the soldiers oftentimes drew this little drawing, and I wanted to make sure I pointed this out to you guys. Maybe you could do a little research on the idea of Kilroy was here, but Kilroy was here became kind of the signature of the American GI. And this photograph was taken at the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. And this became, there's a lot of stories behind the Kilroy was here design. So you can check those out online, see what you can find. But it became kind of the visual signature of American soldiers during World War II. And that's all I have for you today. One of the things that I would really suggest is that you take a look at the playlist I have for you on mobilization in the home front at my website.